Okay. Okay, welcome back to you at Feel the Force. Today we're going to tap into one of the more influential figures of the 20th century, Jiddu Krishnamurti. And he is considered one of the greatest philosophers and teachers of all time, in fact. And his work actually influenced major figures such as George Bernard Shaw, Alan Watts, Henry Miller, who wrote The Radical Tropic of Cancer, Bruce Lee, the painter Jackson Pollock, and the other British philosopher who was into psychedelics, Aldous Huxley. And yet he kind of remains an enigma and has an aspect of humility that is completely almost unprecedented, you could say, because he was enlisted by, an advanced secret society, the Freemasons, who are basically synonymous with the Theosophical Society, into being a big leader, guru, with all the, smells and bells and the pomp and circumstance. And indeed, he lived lavishly, but in the end, he kind of rebelled against this and went his own way, which was quite, revolutionary. And as someone who has a Taurus sun, perhaps you could explain, Georgios, how this shows up, this rebellious spirit, and this rebellious, influential spirit shows up in the first initial layer of his chart.
Yes. So the Taurus thing, we've seen this before. The book author of the book of, I don't know what the title was again, of I Am, or I'm trying to think of a book name. But there was this guy, he was also a spiritual teacher, and he was also a Taurus. And we basically
Nisargadatta
that
or
is
something.
That is him, yes.
Yeah. The one with the almost psychopathic thick stare.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very typical Taurus, right? The Taurus people, they act in a very practical manner. They try to stay very grounded. It's the most slow moving sign. So very good at moving slow, but slow talkers usually, not always, but usually. And sometimes they try to convey messages that can help you in a very practical manner with your physical life, your material life. And these teachers, when they are gurus like that, they have a very good balance between material and non-material, usually. And I guess you can say it about Jiddu Krishnamurti, because he was always explaining things in a very, very simplifying manner. He didn't like things to be complicated. And this showed up in his early life because he was called a very intellectually disabled child, someone who was very dreamy and vague. He was called sickly because he had recurrent diseases, and he wasn't really very interested in the intellectual kind of teachings that were imposed upon him a little bit, because he was groomed into this family where everyone wants to be this mystical, spiritual figure, and they want their children to be gurus or icons of their faith, their cult.
Yeah.
And later on, he was groomed to be a world teacher by a Freemason. According to Wikipedia, there was this guy who saw that he had a very selfless aura. This is what got him really interested in him. And that's why he started to groom him, because the Freemasons usually like to find someone to use for their own ends, and someone who is very selfless and very has a magical kind of attunement, spiritual attunement. These kinds of people, they're the best to recruit for any given cult at any time. So they always naturally look for people like that. So how does that show in his chart? Since we're talking about his chart, well, I see that he has Neptune in the 4th house, conjunction Pluto. So this sometimes can play into a person having a very, very light or very open aura, because Neptune is about holds on the aura, because it's where we have no boundaries, and we integrate the external and make it internal. So we take on other people's burdens, and here in the 4th house is very good for any kind of community that's very closed off, because the 4th house is the house of the home. So these people, usually they are very, very good at forming very close connections with people, where they have a kind of clan or a gathering of sorts, and they play the kind of advisor, confidant, consultant for these people. Because it's conjunction Pluto intensifies this openness, puts it to the next level. This openness can be extreme sometimes, as Pluto is about extremes. And perhaps that is why he attracted some interest.
Yeah, in fact, he's quite hieratic or saint-like in his way of speaking. There are a lot of videos of him that you can watch, and he has this sort of almost transcendental personality that's still very grounded in reality. Like famously, he said, "It's no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society," and that's very frank and very straight shooting. You know, it's not like he's just up in the clouds, kind of boundaryless. He also has that raw realism about the nature of this world and how fucked up it is, and the importance, therefore, of being a separate individual who finds self-realization not through religious organization, but through genuine meditation or introspection.
Yeah, that's right. And I guess the question is, why do we see this in the chart? Why is it like that? Well, for one thing, this kind of people that are straight shooters, people that are very good in articulating themselves, or they're very, very good with one-liners. Because this is like a one-liner, right? He's very good at saying a lot in few words. This is what makes a good guru, a teacher, in some ways. He has Moon in Sagittarius, and this is known for this kind of stuff, especially for striking sentences. And it's in the 11th house, which is very good for being intelligent. I see a lot of people who are very, very mental. They're very quick, and they know how to separate from their own emotions very well. This Moon is very detached. They usually, they do become parts of groups, communities, cults, religions. The 11th houser has a lot of friends, has a lot of contacts, connections, and he made a lot of connections, especially in high places. There was this woman that we researched that he found a woman who reminded him of his mother. someone who was in a government position, who was part of a theosophical society, was working together with a Freemasons that are part of that society. And she took her as a replacement for his mother, who died. Just like his sister, who died in 1904 when he was 9 or 10 years old. And these early kind of deaths, they may have to do with his chart a little bit because has a lot of detached placements. You know, like usually when there's early death, there's an emphasis on detachment. So he has a sun in the 3rd house, which is good for communication. It's the house of Gemini, but the sun in this house is also the son of siblings. So this is normally the person who kind of like becomes a parent to the siblings, or someone who is the embodiment of everything the siblings try to be, but maybe they cannot, maybe something happens. And when there's an early death like this is where he kind of steps into their footsteps, takes on the sister's job of what she wanted to do, lives her life for her. And this might explain the selfless aura this other guy was referring to, this Freemason that recruited him.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to touch on regarding the Freemasons is that essentially they worship Saturn, as it's revealed in a lot of research. Very structured, rigid, conformist, in a box. Is there anything in Krishnamurti's chart that shows that there is a rebellion against Saturn?
Yes. Well, the only aspects, since we're talking about Saturn, is Saturn it's an inconjunct with Chiron, opposition to Pholus, which doesn't mean much, but his ascendant is in Aquarius, which is actually ruled by Saturn. Which again, with a moon in the 11th house, makes him an ideal member to recruit into a society like that. Now, this is opposite to what you're saying, where you're asking what make him rebel.
Yeah.
So there are placements that would make him actually very fitting, but to rebel, well, to be honest,
nothing's
chart is a conformist chart.
Okay, interesting. That's
when I look at his chart, he has the only things that are standing out is the Lilith in the 1st house.
Yeah.
Because Lilith is about rebelling and forming your own identity. That's the thing Aquarius struggles the most with. So it's very good that Aquarius ascendant to have it in the 1st house to compensate for that. And it's usually the compensating aspects like this that often get activated later in life. But at his heart, he's a people person. He's not there to rebel per se. So it's very likely that something else has happened, because he has 3 planets and his wheel of fortune in the 5th house. And the 5th house is the house of self-expression, expressing what I'm thinking, what I'm wanting. And Venus conjunction Jupiter. On the one hand, he had all this luck and finding these people who were trying to groom him into this world teacher. But in the end, he started to talk about revolution, trying to change society. But my question would be to ask is whether the desire to change society was an act of rebellion against society, or was it an act to work together with society and actually help them? Because this chart is a helper chart. And a well-placed Neptune, a servant, and detached moon a detached ascendant, a detached sun. Only Lilith in the 5th house placement says something about self-expression. And this gives him the fire, to kind of actually become this figure, to have the confidence to actually speak up and help people. Because without the confidence, Aquarius cannot help anyone. They're just always succumbing to the pressure.
Yeah. Mm. Yeah, that's very relatable as an Aquarius myself.
Yeah.
But yes, he talks about a lot in his teachings that it's not healthy essentially to conform to society and its expectations. And he emphasizes the importance and beauty of solitude, of being alone and just being your own person. So even though, as the chart shows, it's a helper chart, how does that very individuated aspect kind of fit into that?
That's the objective that is helping him to find balance in later life. And while on one hand, there's this inclination for the more evolved Aquarius ascendants to have a tendency to go towards individuation later, after age 30 especially. On the other hand, he has North Node in the 1st house. The 1st house is the house of identity. So this is the house of separation, is where we become separate the most. The North Node, as it is your destiny, where you headed, this shows the very, very strong focus in later life on this aspect of being. He tried to figure out how to be himself later, after he had already mastered, and after he was already so good at being a people person.
Right. Yeah. That makes sense, really.
A lot of teachers actually, they have this kind of placements. We've seen this before with Osho, remember? He had the stellium or more in the 7th house, all these planets there. It was all about what would other people say, what do they want. His whole psyche was developed and conditioned in such a way to help others and accommodate them and figure out what they want. And here we see a little bit of a similar setting, but the emphasis here is on the 11th house in Aquarius instead of the 7th house in Libra. There's the difference there. So what's the difference exactly? The difference between 7th house and 11th house, like both social houses, Aquarius and Libra, air signs, social signs. The difference is that in the 7th house, we are thinking to become one with the other person and work together. This is instead of saying I am, I feel, I want, I do, or I think, the person says, what do we do? What do we want? What do we think?
Yeah.
And in the 11th house, you're trying to look at, okay, what does the group want? And how do I give them what they want in the best way?
Yeah.
And at the same time, get what I want. Because the 11th house ruler, Aquarius, is a fixed sign. And they're always thinking, oh, I have the good ideas. Look at my ideas. I will give you the ideas that you need. So instead of saying, oh, no, I'm just going to look at your ideas only, or mostly the 7th house. 11th house says, look, this is my ideas, and this is why I am good for you. You see what I mean? Like, this is why I can be your friend. This is why we can work together, because I have this for you.
Interesting. And famously, Osho and Krishnamurti were contemporaries, but they were rivals. They really didn't like each other, and they were practically opposing forces, quite literally. And what my takeaway is that Osho might have been more of a wild card or a joker type, whereas Krishnamurti was much more serious and down to earth.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, it's interesting.
It's good because, like we discussed Osho before, Osho really had a lot of problems. He was too dependent on what other people want from him.
Mm.
You see, that's the difference as well. Seventh house is talking about we, what do we want? So the we means there's dependency, there's like as a unit. But the 11th house are, okay, what you want and I will give it to you, but I'm detached, like I'm up here in the clouds.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's ruled by Saturn. And Saturn really is like holding your ground, staying safe and reasonable, realistic. After all, his chart ruler is Saturn. And this Saturn is in the 9th house, which is very good for him because it's in the house of philosophy. Saturn is in one of the best houses, is the 3rd house in the 9th house for Saturn. Because the mind gets very, very razor sharp, gets very, very critical.
Yes.
Trying to get the right philosophy, the right teaching. Because Saturn is about wisdom. Wherever he's in the chart, he gives us wisdom there because we get so serious about making that right. Because the only people that are not serious about anything are children.
Yeah.
The opposite of Saturn, which are like old people. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about his mystical side. Because we talked a lot about his mind, how his mind works, 11th house, intellectual Aquarius.
Yeah.
But why is this a spiritual teacher? I made this note when he was 18 years old. He described to have psychic experiences, such as seeing his sister who died and his mother who died. And he was very, very, very connected to this otherworldly realm, as reported by other people. It's almost like he was, as a child, because he was so sensitive and dreamy and vague, as he was described, he was always in the clouds in his early life. And that's quite interesting because his north node is in Pisces. So this is kind of where the person has to develop in this direction. And usually with north node in Pisces, the person is forced to have psychic experiences. And this is usually through loss. Like, let this pain be your greatest teacher. I always like to associate the north node with pain. Like, you need some pain to go there, otherwise you're not going to move. You're just going to stay in the south node, which is in vogue for him, which is intellectual, it's just grounded, this is about helping people, but you're not helping in the other realms. So what happened? Like we taught before, mother died, sister died. The feminine role models disappeared very early. So what does he do as a 3rd house person, which is a sibling person? He joins them. He tries to live their life for them. And he's a man, so he has to live the life of a woman, his mother, and another woman, his sister, to live their femininity out. And again, Pisces is a feminine sign. And this feminine energy, this surrender, this I will join you. You disappeared on me and I will disappear like you did. Join you in the other side. The only way I can get close to you is by making myself disappear. This is like the Pisces, like the martyr, I'm going to die for you. I'm going to give my life so I can meet you and get closer. And in this deep, deep waters, this is where the psychic abilities develop. Like we talked about before, about Teal Swan, in the enclosed space, right?
Yes.
So we have this kind of theme is kind of playing again, where there's some kind of loss, kind of confinement for the mind. The mind gets trapped in this, I have to stay in the waters. I'm not gonna surface. I'm not gonna come out. I'm gonna stay here with mommy and my sister. And so the psychic sensitivity was groomed. very early on. Of course, as with some other people we have seen from his biography that he had a spiritual experience in 1922. This, he was about 27 or something, about my age actually. So about my age and your age, like a little bit younger than you, I am. So he was around that age, having this experience that he described, which is to be told to be some kind of pain that appeared on his neck. And then he got very tired. He lost his appetite for a long time. And he was being delirious, as described by other people. He was talking about being one, where he had this kind of climate experience, this climax of getting immense peace, as he described. So I would say that from his reports and the pains that he went through in this process, he was likely having a Kundalini awakening, which is something we see more often when we go into these kind of spiritual teacher figures, into their backgrounds, but we hear very similar stories sometimes.
So that would have been during his Saturn return as well.
That's right, which is in the 9th house, right?
Yeah.
House of spiritual expansion, the house of Jupiter and Sagittarius.
Yeah.
This is house of awakening, which is also, it's not just a 9th house thing, but it's also an Aquarius thing. Both Jupiter and Uranus, they are about this very, very far away information. This very far away truth that you're trying to get access to, trying to move something up. It's a very masculine energy in both cases. And I would say that when a person, they go through a lot of extremes, where they explore these deep waters, like we talked about them before, they get stuck at some point. They reach a wall. And when a wall is reached, the body expresses it very usually like pain symptoms. Symptoms of, oh, you don't have energy, you're tired, you don't want to eat, don't want to do anything, don't want to move.
Yeah.
And if you're lucky, and your mind has the goal of spiritual expansion or whatever, then maybe, just maybe, you'll get there. If that is what it takes to get out of that state, to get out of that joining them in death, which is Chiron in the 8th house, which a lot of people have that I work with. In trauma work, I get a lot of people actually. Chiron in the 8th house is where there was a loss with the mother figure.
Yeah.
It's like this deep fear of losing the mother, where you create this symbiotic bond with her. And before you are even born, already you feel like, I'm gonna lose her. She's gonna leave me. I know she's gonna leave me. She's not gonna be there for me unless I stay here. And imagine you're a small child. So we're thinking about Jiddu Krishnamurti's mind. It's led to this awakening, to the spiritual experience, to the, all having to do with his mother, his family upbringing, everything. You're a small child, and you know, for some reason, you just feel it in your gut. Mother is gonna leave you. She's not gonna stay. So what you do, you try to attach to her, like, to grab her. But as you try to grab her, she slips away. Because you can't make that anchor, you can't make that connection.
Yeah.
You just can't reach her.
Yeah.
She just separates.
Yeah. And by extension, this might have influenced something he famously said, which is, my secret is I don't mind what happens. That is the essence of inner freedom. It is a timeless spiritual truth. Release attachment to outcomes. deep inside yourself, and you'll feel good no matter what.
That's quite right. His internal attitude.
Yeah.
This is how he dealt with a problem.
Yeah.
Because the eighth house, the house of death, the house of death, the house of oh, like it's intense, ruled by Pluto, like something's gonna sting.
Yeah.
It's almost like we're consumed by this need to have mother with us. But the way we separate is that we detach from our roots. We move away from our emotionally, spiritually, psychologically.
Yeah.
Because the eighth house is very different from the fourth house. Both are water houses. The fourth house is the house of attachment. Here we make mother our home. We become one with her. We make the room, make it cozy. We settle down. But in the eighth house, it's about, in order to step into our power, right? Pluto, the eighth house ruler, about power. We need to get out of here.
Yeah.
Get out and use the pain as the fuel to make the car go. So that's why people sometimes say jokingly, Scorpio, the eighth house ruling sign, is like a fire sign.
Yeah.
Because they're trying so hard to get out of that pain.
Yes.
Because it stings, it just keeps stinging. And of course, what you said, that he is just about detaching from the internal objects, which the pain is associated with, the internal attachments, to try to get rid of them, is this Pluto conjunction Neptune, this extreme detachment, this extreme openness. This is extreme openness, right there. This is Pluto conjunction Neptune right there. This saying, I don't care what happens. Give it to me, baby. Bring it to me. Come
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
And Pisces North, like all of this at the same time.
Yeah.
When you have multiple aspects all doing this work, and the death of the family just fueling this, and you have the recipe for this little alchemical drink to make this little journey happen.
Yeah. Another interesting point is that he was renowned for his humility, and yet towards the end of his life, he was asked, what do you regret? And he did say, I wish I could have been kinder. So he's kind of admitting that there was some aspect of him that was not very nice.
Yeah.
I mean, how does that show up?
He has a lot going on in the fifth house: Mars, Jupiter, Venus, and Mercury in Taurus. These placements are not known to be nice. It's very fixed placements.
Yeah.
So it's about, okay, I'm going to say what I want to say, and you're just going to have to take it, kind of.
Yeah.
And of course, he needs this attitude if he wants to be a teacher.
Yeah.
And this comes out a lot, actually, in his talks. You'll probably notice that this confidence he has, and he just, imagine if someone questioned him, or if someone tried to challenge him or something.
Yeah.
They would not survive. He would just argue them down.
Yeah.
And of course, Moon in Sagittarius, they just like to fight, like it's just this general fire moon thing,
Yeah.
They love a good fighting.
Oh.
And the first house, Northwood, again, Northwood in the house of Mars, ruled by Aries.
Yeah.
These people, they're all about, I have to learn what I say, what I want. Because they learn through painful lessons, like in this case, through all this people person stuff.
Yes.
But they compromise themselves unconsciously. They give a little bit too much. So he would actually have the issue of being too nice. And if he wants to break out of it, he wants to be the teacher, which he did, he had to stop being so nice.
Yeah.
And Why he says he regrets that, I don't know.
Yeah,
I have no idea.
interesting.
It's probably something in his private life.
Perhaps.
Because he has a very detached Venus there. Gemini conjunction Jupiter in the 5th house. This is the kind of Venus they go into bed with up just about everyone. I mean, you wouldn't think that he's this type.
No.
But in the chart, this is a placement where the person's just like, he just goes into people, talks to them. He's very detached. He's very friendly.
Mm.
But he goes for what he wants.
Yes. And yeah, like just watching him, he does have that feminine aspect that you mentioned already. It's quite almost ethereal and feminine, like a feminine ethereality, which is kind of there, like a waif almost,
Yeah.
waif-like. It's interesting.
He also is a Scorpio midheaven.
Okay.
It seems like the whole chart, there's so many planets. You notice that, right?
Yeah.
It always goes back to this early death in the family.
Right. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
one more thing
Yeah.
before we wrap it up.
We have 2 minutes. Yeah.
His moon is conjunction Pallas, which is the goddess of wisdom.
Mm.
It's very good. Sagittarius moon, the 11th house of people, a sign of philosophy and education. With a goddess of wisdom, what else you want for a teacher? And I guess it's a very good placement for him because he had to be this wise figure.
Yeah.
He had to be very, very particular in the choices he makes. As he was groomed to be this teacher by these Freemasons, they called him a world teacher that he was supposed to be. And he was making sure that that's going to happen. And this placement helps with that. Because Athena, the goddess of wisdom, is about strategy, tactics,
And
making the right moves.
totally. And his communication style is very crystal clear and concise. It's like no bullshit. It's just straight to the point. Yeah. But anyways, no, thank you. That's been really edifying. And thank you for joining us at Feel the Force. And till next time. Thank you, Georgios.
Yes, thank you as well.
Take care.
Take care.